The moment he stepped onto the AGT stage, no one knew what to expect. But the second this Filipino singer opened his mouth and delivered that first Elvis-style note, the entire audience froze. It wasn't just good, it was uncannily close to the king himself. Judges leaned forward, the crowd went silent, and Simon Cowell's eyes widened in pure disbelief. Every lyric carried emotion, power, and a soulful depth that no one saw coming. By the time he hit the final note, people were on their feet, cheering, crying, and witnessing a performance they would never forget. The lights inside the America's Got Talent theater dimmed slowly, as though the room itself was inhaling before something important. In that vast sea of faces, judges, audience, crew members, and viewers watching from their screens, everyone sat in a familiar state of anticipation. Another audition, another dreamer, another story waiting to unfold. Yet no one, not even the most experienced producers backstage, could predict what was about to happen. A soft spotlight illuminated the stage entrance, where a slim, slightly nervous Filipino man stood behind the curtain. His fingers trembled against the microphone he held. He wasn't young enough to be considered a child prodigy, nor old enough to be seen as a comeback legend. He was simply ordinary. And sometimes the most ordinary people carry the most extraordinary gifts. His name was Matteo Rivera, a full-time kitchen helper at a small diner and part-time street performer in Manila. Before moving to the U.S., he had spent his life singing for strangers who barely noticed him, scrubbing dishes in between dreams, hoping that one day someone would listen. Really listen. Today was that day. Backstage, a producer placed a hand on his shoulder, sensing the weight of nerves tightening his body. "You're going to do great," she said warmly. Matteo nodded but couldn't force out a word. His throat was dry, his heartbeat uneven, like a drum out of rhythm. He whispered a quick prayer under his breath, a practice he had done since childhood whenever he needed strength. The curtain parted just enough for him to see the stage. Bright, loud, enormous. The very sight of it nearly knocked the breath out of him. A few seconds later, the stage manager nodded, signaling it was time. The floor beneath Matteo's feet felt heavier with each step, but he walked forward anyway, one step, another, and then another, until the blinding glow of the AGT stage swallowed him whole. The crowd welcomed him with polite applause, the kind they gave to every contestant who stepped out. Not too excited, not too cold. Neutral, expectant, the kind of applause that said, "Show us who you are." Matteo forced a small smile and lifted the microphone, gripping it tighter than he meant to. At the judges' table, the reaction was predictably calm. Howie Mandel rested his chin in his hand, studying Matteo with curiosity. Sofia Vergara smiled warmly, giving him an encouraging nod. Heidi Klum glanced at his outfit, a simple button-down shirt and black jeans, and then leaned closer to her mic. But Simon Cowell, he didn't smile. He rarely did, especially before hearing a note. He leaned back, arms crossed, the very picture of skepticism mixed with curiosity. His instinct was sharp. He could often predict a performance before it began. Something about Matteo, his shy posture, his trembling fingers, made Simon raise an eyebrow. He wasn't dismissive, but he wasn't convinced either. "Hello," Simon finally said. His voice echoed across the quiet theater. "Hello," Matteo whispered back, barely audible. "What's your name?" Heidi asked gently. "My name is Matteo Rivera. I'm from the Philippines." The crowd reacted with soft murmurs of support. A few Filipino fans waved their flags proudly. Matteo's shoulders relaxed just a little. Hearing familiar voices in the audience felt like home. "And what will you be doing for us today?" Sofia asked, smiling. Matteo took a breath he hoped would steady him. "I'm going to sing an Elvis Presley song," he said softly. A ripple of amusement passed through the crowd. Not mean-spirited, more like surprise. Elvis impersonations were common, and many didn't go well. People had heard them all, the off-key Presley, the overly dramatic Presley, the almost Elvis but not quite Presley. Even the judges exchanged quick glances. Everyone recognized the challenge he had just placed on himself. Simon shifted in his chair. "Elvis?" he repeated, sounding both intrigued and doubtful. Matteo nodded. Simon narrowed his eyes, assessing him. "Why Elvis?" Matteo swallowed hard. He knew this question would come. "Because Elvis was the first singer I ever heard. My father used to play his records every night after work." His voice cracked slightly. He said Elvis made him feel alive. And when I listened, I felt the same. The audience softened at his words. Simon uncrossed his arms, his expression no longer skeptical but thoughtful. "How old were you when you started singing?" Howie asked. "I was maybe 5 or 6, Matteo said. "I used to sing outside our house, and neighbors would say I sounded like Elvis, but I don't know, I just feel his music inside me." A gentle wave of support swept the room, but still, there was tension, an unspoken question hanging in the air. Can he actually pull it off? Elvis wasn't an easy mountain to climb, and many had tried, and failed, on this very stage. "How are you feeling right now?" Heidi asked with a warm smile. "Very nervous," Matteo admitted honestly. His voice shook, but bravery lived inside it. "But this is my dream." Simon leaned forward. "And we want you to do well," he said unexpectedly. It was rare for him to express encouragement before hearing a performance. But something about the sincerity in Matteo's voice stirred something inside him. Matteo nodded, grateful. Behind him, the massive AGT LED screen glowed blue, casting a soft glow around his silhouette. The stage lights dimmed until only one spotlight remained, right over him. For a moment, the world fell silent. Matteo closed his eyes. He thought of the nights he spent singing outside sari-sari stores in Manila, his voice blending with the sounds of tricycles and street vendors. He thought of his father's smile as he listened to Elvis vinyls spinning on their old turntable. He thought of the plane ride to America, sitting next to strangers, clutching a single suitcase filled with clothes, memories, and hope. He thought of the countless times he dreamed of standing on this stage. Then, the music cued. A gentle guitar line filled the room. Soft, nostalgic, unmistakably Elvis. A murmur spread through the audience. Heads tilted. People leaned in. Backstage, production crew members paused their tasks, turning toward the monitor. The judges straightened in their chairs. Simon's gaze sharpened, studying every small movement, every flicker of emotion crossing Matteo's face. Matteo lifted the microphone to his lips. His breath steadied. The fear inside him quieted. The weight of his entire life, his struggles, his dreams, his sacrifices, centered into one single moment. And as the music built toward the first note, a strange calm washed over him. It felt like destiny, like this moment was always meant to happen, like Elvis himself was watching. The entire theater held its breath, and with the spotlight glowing around him like a halo, Matteo opened his eyes, took a final breath, and prepared to deliver a note that would change everything. The music swelled softly around him, gentle, warm, and nostalgic, like a familiar friend guiding him into the moment he had waited for his entire life. The audience leaned forward, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Something unseen, something electric, vibrated in the air. It wasn't visible, but everyone felt it. Matteo's eyes opened slowly. The golden stage lights shimmered across his face, catching the nervous but determined spark in his gaze. He took one more breath, deep, controlled, yet heavy with emotion, and raised the microphone closer. The world seemed to freeze in anticipation, and then he sang. The first note wasn't just sung, it floated, smooth, deep, soulful, a tone so rich, so unexpectedly warm that the entire AGT theater gasped as one. The note echoed through the room with a calm, effortless beauty, riding the melody like it was second nature. It was Elvis, not an imitation, not a forced impersonation. It was Elvis's spirit carried through the voice of an unlikely Filipino dreamer standing alone under a spotlight. Gasps rippled across the audience. Heads snapped upward. People who had been whispering fell silent. The theater shifted from polite curiosity into stunned awe. On the judges' panel, reactions were instant. Heidi's jaw dropped, literally. Her eyes widened, her eyebrows shooting upward in surprise. She leaned in as though moving closer would help her understand what she was hearing. Sophia's hand shot to her mouth in pure disbelief, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Oh my God," she whispered, though her mic didn't catch it. Only those closest to her heard. Howie leaned forward, elbows on the table, mouth slightly open, shaking his head like he couldn't believe the voice coming from such a humble, gentle man. Simon. Simon Cowell froze. His hands, previously clasped in front of him, slowly lowered to the table. His posture straightened, and that familiar, rare expression crossed his face. Genuine shock. The kind of shock he doesn't hide because it's too real, too involuntary. His eyes focused sharply on Matteo, scanning him, trying to understand how someone so nervous could produce a voice so controlled, so smooth, so hauntingly reminiscent of the king of rock and roll. This wasn't luck. This wasn't karaoke. This was talent. Pure, raw, real talent. The second line of the song came, and Matteo stepped fully into the moment. His voice deepened, filling the room with a timbre that felt impossibly close to Elvis's iconic resonance. Yet it still carried a softness, a gentle signature that made it uniquely his. The audience began murmuring, those soft sounds of surprise, admiration, awe. People nudged each other, smiled, pointed, whispered things like, "Do you hear that? He sounds just like Elvis. Where did this guy come from?" Some stood up already, unable to stay seated as the energy grew. His voice carried power, but not the loud, forceful kind. It was emotional power, the kind that curled around the heart, tugging memories, awakening nostalgia. The kind that made people feel something they hadn't felt in years. There was an old man in the third row who clenched his chest, not out of fear, but out of shock. He had seen Elvis perform live in Las Vegas decades ago, and hearing this voice now felt like time travel. Tears gathered in his eyes. Matteo closed his eyes again as he reached the first chorus. His fear was gone. His nerves had melted away like shadows under sunlight. Instead, there was something else, confidence. Not arrogance, but the quiet kind that comes from surviving life's hardest moments. With every lyric, he sang not just with skill, but with history. His childhood in the Philippines, his father's love for Elvis, the struggles of working long hours in a small diner kitchen, the sacrifices he made to come to America, the dream he carried across oceans. And it showed. Emotion poured out of him, not dramatic, not overdone, but real, intimate, honest. The camera cut to Simon again. His lips parted slightly in disbelief. He blinked as though his brain needed an extra second to catch up with what his ears were hearing. Then his head tilted, another Simon gesture that meant only one thing. This is special, really special. The song continued building, and Matteo's voice followed effortlessly. His lower notes were rich velvet, while his higher ones soared softly without strain. Not once did he force anything. He simply sang, letting the music move through him like he had been born for this exact moment. Halfway through the performance, the audience couldn't hold back anymore. Applause erupted, loud, spontaneous, overflowing with emotion. People stood from their seats mid-song, cheering, clapping, waving their hands. It wasn't just appreciation, it was connection. For those brief minutes, the entire room felt united by one voice. Matteo didn't open his eyes yet. He was lost in the music. But he felt the energy, felt the love, felt the sound of hearts beating with his own. The camera showed a Filipino family in the audience wiping tears, holding a small Philippine flag close to their chest. To them, this wasn't just entertainment. It was representation, pride, hope. To others, it was nostalgia. A reminder of a voice long missed, brought back to life through someone completely unexpected. To everyone, it was magic. Then came the climax of the song, a note that required precision, control, and emotion all wrapped into one perfect moment. And Matteo delivered, not with sheer power, but with a delicacy that made the note shine, tremble with feeling, and linger in the air like a warm memory refusing to fade. People cried, people cheered, people believed. And when he finally opened his eyes, he saw the entire AGT theater glowing, lights bouncing off tear-streaked faces, people swaying, judges standing, cameras flashing. But what caught his eye most was Simon, standing. Yes, standing. Simon Cowell, the hardest judge to impress, was on his feet, applauding slowly but intensely, his expression a mixture of awe, respect, and pride. Sophia's eyes were wet. Heidi clapped like she was celebrating a miracle. Howie shook his head, smiling wide, amazed. Matteo felt his breath catch. His knees almost buckled. A surge of emotion flooded through him so intensely that he nearly choked on the last lyric. But he held it together. He finished the song with a soft, gentle final note that drifted into silence like a whisper of grace. And for a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. It was that special kind of silence, the kind that follows something extraordinary. Then, the crowd exploded. A roaring, thunderous standing ovation shook the theater. Cheers rained down from every corner. People shouted his name, flags waved, tears flowed freely. It was overwhelming, surreal, dreamlike. Matteo lowered the microphone slowly. His lips trembled. His eyes filled. He had done it. After all the years of struggle, fear, and doubt, he finally felt seen. And as he stood there shaking, staring at the cheering crowd, he realized this wasn't just a performance. It was his moment, his breakthrough, his miracle, and it was only the beginning. For a few moments after the final note faded, the entire AGT theater felt frozen in time. It was as though the performance had cast a spell, one so powerful that no one dared break it with sound or movement. Matteo stood alone under the warm spotlight, chest rising and falling quickly, his heart thundering in his ears. His fingers trembled around the microphone. His eyes stung with tears he tried desperately to hold back. Then it happened. A single clap, then another, then a wave. Like a tidal surge of emotion finally breaking free, the theater erupted. Thousands rose to their feet in a single, explosive motion. A roar swept through the room. Cheers, whistles, applause that echoed like thunder against the walls. It wasn't polite, routine applause. It was gratitude, the kind of applause given only to performances that touch the soul. Matteo's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, trying to take everything in. The faces glowing with admiration, the flags waving, the strangers crying. His throat tightened. A feeling he'd never known before swelled inside him. Validation. The kind every artist dreams of but rarely experiences. He dared to look at the judges. Sophia was standing tall, clapping with genuine joy, her eyes shimmering. She mouthed the words, "So beautiful." Heidi wiped the corner of her eye with a finger, smiling so wide it looked like her cheeks hurt. Howie shook his head in disbelief, laughter and awe mixing together on his face. But the moment that nearly brought Matteo to his knees was Simon Cowell. Known for his tough critiques, his high standards, his famously difficult-to-earn approval, was standing. Not reluctantly, not politely. He was truly applauding. His expression held something rare, respect. Deep, genuine respect. When their eyes met, Simon nodded once, slowly, meaningfully, a nod that said, "You did it. You really did it." Matteo felt his chest tighten again. He gripped the microphone stand to steady himself. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined Simon Cowell, the very symbol of musical authority, would rise for him. The audience continued cheering, refusing to sit back down. They wanted him to feel this moment fully because they felt it too, because they knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. Finally, as the applause softened enough to allow words, Howie leaned toward his microphone. "Matteo," he said, still shaking his head in amazement, "you didn't just sing an Elvis song. You brought his spirit back to this stage. I felt like I was hearing him again for the first time. Absolutely incredible." The crowd cheered, agreeing wholeheartedly. Sophia leaned forward next. "It was beautiful. You gave us something we don't get very often. Goosebumps, nostalgia, and emotion all in one. You reminded us why we love music so much." Heidi added, "I got chills from the very first note. You have a gift, Matteo. A real one. You sang from your heart, and we all felt it." Matteo tried to speak, but his voice cracked. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Thank you. Thank you so much." His Filipino accent was gentle, but every word carried emotion so raw that it made the crowd erupt again. And then came Simon. He waited for the noise to settle, his gaze still fixed on Matteo. He leaned into his microphone, his voice calm but heavy with emotion. "Matteo," he began, "I've heard many Elvis performances in my life. Too many, to be honest. But what you just did wasn't an impersonation." He paused, letting the words sink in. It was a tribute, a heartfelt, powerful tribute. You honored Elvis without copying him, and that, he pointed toward Matteo, is what makes you special. Matteo gasped softly, pressing a hand to his chest. Simon continued, "You have a gift that people wait years to witness, and tonight we were lucky enough to witness it. I think your father would be very, very proud of you." That broke him. Matteo's tears finally fell, heavy, uncontrollable, streaming down his face, as the crowd awed in empathy. He covered his mouth, overwhelmed by the mention of his father, the man who introduced him to Elvis and whose memory fueled his dreams. The judges allowed him a moment, giving him space to breathe. When he finally steadied himself, he looked out at the audience, this massive sea of strangers who suddenly felt like family. He whispered again, "Thank you. I won't forget this, ever." And then it was time for the vote. Howie smiled. "It's a yes from me." Sophia clapped lightly. "A huge yes," Heidi beamed. "1,000,000% yes." Simon paused, letting suspense hang in the air. Then he smirked. "Matteo, it's the easiest yes I've given in a long time." The theater shook with applause. Golden confetti didn't fall, not yet. It wasn't a golden buzzer moment. But strangely, it didn't matter. Because sometimes a performance doesn't need gold falling from the ceiling to feel golden. Matteo didn't need extra spectacle. The moment itself, raw, emotional, unforgettable, was worth more than any buzzer. As Matteo walked off the stage, shaking, crying, smiling all at once, crew members backstage rushed to congratulate him. One handed him a water bottle, another hugged him. The producer who encouraged him earlier wiped a tear and whispered, "I told you, you were going to do great." Matteo looked back one last time. The stage was still glowing, the audience still cheering, the judges still smiling, and as he stepped away fully, he realized something. For the first time in his entire life, he felt like he belonged, like he had a place in the world of music, like his voice, his once ignored, once unnoticed voice, had finally found its home. And as the camera faded out, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a performance. This was the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever.